This is SBS World News with Ricardo Gonçalves.
Good evening. We begin with breaking news out of London tonight, where after days of pressure from his own party to resign, Boris Johnson is doing just that. For the latest, let's go straight to our chief international correspondent, Ben Lewis. Ben, what are you hearing?
Ricardo, good evening. It is over. Boris Johnson will be resigning. Preparations are being made here in Downing Street for a podium to be brought out where he is expected to address the nation at some point in the next few hours. Remarkably, he had been hoping to hang on, but this morning more and more ministers had been resigning. More than 50 resignations from his government. It was impossible for him to go on. It caps off what has been one of the most remarkable 24 hours in British political history. Leaving number 10, not permanently, not yet anyway, just down the road to Parliament and Prime Minister's questions, where Boris Johnson insisted he'll carry on.
The job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
What a pathetic spectacle.
Exactly.
The dying act of his political career is to parrot that nonsense.
Yep. The opposition leader saving some of his anger for cabinet ministers who'd backed their boss through countless scandals.
Anyone quitting now, after defending all that, hasn't got a shred of integrity. Mr. Speaker, isn't this the first recorded case of the sinking ships fleeing the rat?
Many of Mr Johnson's own MPs begging their leader to call it quits, citing the Partygate saga and the handling of a sexual misconduct case involving a lawmaker the PM had promoted.
Today I ask him to do the honourable thing, to put the interests of the nation before his own interests, and before, in his own words, it does become impossible for government to do its job.
Then an extraordinary speech by the now former Health Secretary.
And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough. I believe that point is now.
The day went from bad to worse for Mr Johnson.
Prime Minister, how's your week going?
Terrific. Like many others.
Grilled by a parliamentary committee, he discussed policies he'll never get to implement, while news channels showed a running count of ministers who'd quit.
I look at the issues that this country faces. I look at the pressures that people are under and the need for government to focus on their priorities, which is what we are doing. I look at the biggest war in Europe for 80 years, and I cannot for the life of me see how it is responsible just to walk away from it.
Downing Street has just confirmed that the Prime Minister will be addressing the nation at some point today. Really, he had no choice. So many government ministers had left. He didn't have enough MPs who would be willing to replace them. One of those who quit in the last hour or so is the Chancellor of the Exchequer, essentially the equivalent of the Treasurer, Nadeem Zahawi. He had only been put in that role about 36 hours earlier. However, he tweeted to say, Prime Minister, this is not sustainable and it will only get worse for you, for the Conservative Party, and most importantly of all, the country. You must do the right thing and go now. Boris Johnson really did think he was going to be able to hang on. Last night, a group of senior government allies, including some ministers, came to him and said, you need to go now. You might be able to leave with some dignity left. He told them he'd be happy to go to another confidence vote, still believing he could win it, but that is not the case. So Boris Johnson will be resigning. He will stay on in a caretaker role probably until October or so, when a new leader of the Conservative Party can be found. It has been a remarkable political ride in office for Mr Johnson. He took over from Theresa May in 2019. He won the general election in a landslide, an 80-seat majority, promising to get Brexit done. He did that. He got a Brexit withdrawal agreement signed. However, then there was the pandemic, heavily criticised for his management of that. He he almost died himself after catching COVID-19. Then there was scandal after scandal, Partygate, and most recently new revelations regarding the promotion of an MP who had been previously accused of sexual impropriety. It was too much for MPs. He was on the nose with the public. Boris Johnson will soon be stepping down as Prime Minister. Ricardo.
Ben Lewis there from Downing Street, thank you, and we will return to London later in the program. Returning to our top story now, and the breaking news out of London tonight, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is to resign. Let's return to our chief international correspondent, Ben Lewis, who is on Downing Street. Ben, we're still waiting to hear from the Prime Minister.
Yeah, that's right, Ricardo. No word yet from Number 10 as to when the Prime Minister will be addressing the nation. We normally know when that's imminent because they bring out a little podium here in front of the Number 10 door, and so far that has not happened, so it may still be a little way off as yet. Earlier I said that Boris Johnson is hoping to stay on in a caretaker position until October, when a new leader of the Conservative Party and therefore a new British Prime Minister can be announced. However, we've heard from Tory MPs in the last few minutes, many of them who say because of Mr Johnson's actions over the last 48 hours, that is simply not a tenable solution. There is a real push for him to stand down immediately so that he can be replaced in a caretaker role by the current Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. The other big question is all of those ministers, parliamentary private secretaries and trade envoys who resigned over Mr Johnson's leadership over the last couple of days or so, will they take those positions back? Because currently the UK barely has a functioning government.
And Ben, are there any early indications of his likely replacement?
Yeah, well, Conservative MPs and ministers have been jockeying in the leadership race unofficially for quite some time now. The big two contenders really are the two secretaries who resigned, bringing about Boris Johnson's downfall. The first is Rishi Sunak, formerly the Chancellor, although his wife's tax affairs have caused him some problems recently. And then there's Sajid Javid, the former Health Secretary, whose resignation speech in the Commons yesterday sounded an awful lot like the start of a leadership bid. Then there is Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, and she is incredibly popular with the Conservative Party base. Labor says it doesn't matter who's in charge, it will still be the same old Conservative government. The Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer, has just released a statement saying it's good news for the country that Boris Johnson has resigned as Prime Minister, but it should have happened long ago. He was always unfit for office. He has been responsible for lies, scandal and fraud on an industrial scale, and all those who have been complicit should be utterly ashamed. So, Ricardo, still waiting for word from Number 10 as to when Boris Johnson will address the British public.
OK, Ben Lewis with that developing story there in London. Thank you.